I mean, Becky, we've worked together for so long. It's I feel like a baby's been born. Like, finally, the baby's born.
Yes, I do too.
I'm
A
so
10,
proud of you.
born as a 10-year-old ready to go to college.
Yeah, no kidding. I was asking you while we were setting everything up, how does it feel now? Does it feel like you expected it to feel?
So it doesn't really. I wanted this so bad and I waited so long. I expected it to be really, really exciting. And while it's exciting and I'm really happy that I'm here, I don't have that absolute joy and delight and oh my gosh, can I even believe it? I can believe it because I worked really hard and it took so long to get here. And I was telling you, it kind of feel like sending kids to college. It's time. It's time to let this go and to
Right.
move this along out into the world. That's how it feels.
I
Yeah.
just know a lot of stories about publication, my own included, and the path is never direct. And we were
Right.
talking a little bit about this, and you wrote about it, about, you're getting it started, your ideas and what you needed to learn and all the skills you needed to acquire. And one of them, of course, is tenacity. And as I was thinking about your journey, it really did mirror the tenacity of you as a young child, kind of tenaciously moving forward and choosing to be more vocal necessarily than your brother, and choosing a very specific series of objections to your father. And I was like, well, this is very consistent with the woman she's had to become, especially in this journey of writing this book and pursuing publication. It's like,
Yeah.
I really wanted to talk to you about this, a continuation of this idea of vision, because I really did just skim on the surface of that in this piece that we kind of co-wrote. Um, and that I know that you did always have your vision. I often found it extremely frustrating. I was like, would you just write this book or that book? But just, why both? And you were like, no, I'm doing both, right? You had this absolute devotion to your vision. And yet, along the way, you also had this absolute devotion to getting published and published mainstream, not self publishing, not she writes, no hybrid. You were going to do it this way. And so these two things kind of created this tension for you. And I wanted you to share a little bit about that journey where you were still convinced of your vision, but also thrown off vision because this desire to get published mainstream kind of nudged it off a little bit. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes. So I think many factors came into play with all of it. From first, what you said about me as a child and the tenacity I had. There were definitely qualities I picked up in childhood to survive it, about determination and never quitting, that got me to this place, right? That is definitely part of my personality, my makeup. And so that played a factor in not giving up. And this idea, I was thinking about, why did I never get rid of my vision? Why did I always want both stories to live in this book? Because memoir is supposed to be a slice of life. And I wanted it to be a slice of my life and a slice of my father's life. And then a slice of our life together as he was older. So that's kind of three slices of two different lives. And that's a lot. And it was really hard. And as you know, took a long time to figure out a structure that would hold all of that. And I think I never gave that up because as I was growing, I would sometimes like spool out a little bit of my childhood to somebody, explain a little bit of something, whether it was getting my teeth drilled without Novocaine or how my father taught me to shoot a gun when I was young. People were kind of shocked, like they didn't quite understand what my childhood was like. And I came to realize my experience was inconceivable. My story's inconceivable without my father's. And my father's, I feel so strongly, is incomplete without mine. There were so many stories about war, especially World War II, and none, if any, or few, if any, talk about what happens when the soldier comes home to raise a family. And that's my story. And that is the story that needed to be told. There's such an absent voice of women and children in the war narrative. And I wanted that voice to be out there. And so, but I really felt like I didn't want my father to be misunderstood in it. And I wanted people to understand where it came from. And so that is what drove me always. Because, I was thinking today about how in the Crawdads book, there's a mention that the little girl's dad was in a war, just a mention of it. But it's not about that, but we can see I could see that impacts her life. And there are lots of stories that kind of make mention of it, but they don't really develop the complexity of it. And that was super important to me. And as far as traditional versus hybrid or self-publishing goes, my entire career was in publishing. And I know how hard discoverability is. And I just wanted to do it the traditional way, the way that, to me, because I was in publishing for so long, held a lot of credibility, and I knew I could have a team supporting the book rather than just me. That's kind of what that was about.
Yeah. So, and here you are on your journey. I'm going to have this book. I'm going to have it this way. And then you end up with a literary agent who connects you to a press, Harmony Press, who says, hey, we see this as a self-help book. And you're like, okay, well, maybe not, but okay. And without a deal, without an agreement, without anything, just an idea from an editor you connected with at Harmony, you went in that direction for a while, in many ways getting off vision.
Yes.
And how did that feel? I mean, how did that work for you?
So that was a year I spent on that rewrite, a whole year. So I was off track for a year. I still included my father's story in it. But how that all played out was my literary agent, Heather, saw, we got the manuscript ready to go, and she put it out there. And within a few days, 7 of the biggest publishers, 7 of the imprints loved it, right? The editors loved it. They were showing it to their marketing sales over the weekend. She expected there to be some kind of auction the next week. And one by one over the weekend and on Monday, they all dropped out. And what they kept saying was, our sales and marketing team do not know where to put this book. Is it biography? Is it memoir? What is it really? We love it, but we don't know where to put it on the bookshelf. And this made me insane because that was my job. I know where to put it on the bookshelf. I know how to sell it. So the one publisher that hung in there was Harmony. And they said, we really love it. And this editor really wanted to publish it, but they publish self-help books. So it could be memoir, but it needed to be more a guide, more of a self-help sort of angle to it. So I thought, okay, well, that's what the universe is putting in front of me. That is what is being offered. I will do my best. And I spent a year reworking it, rewriting it, adding a ton of stuff into it, a whole bunch of stuff about how therapy played a role in my experience. And it was an absolute mess. I did not like what I had written. It didn't feel right. And I turned it in anyway. And they said, no, thank you. And I'm really glad they said, no, thank you.
Right.
Yeah,
I really,
like,
thank you.
Thank you for saying no, thank you. Yeah.
Right.
And at that point is when we decided to get a developmental editor in and see, okay, we've been through this whole thing. I have lost not my vision, but I have lost any creative idea about what to do with it now. I knew the story was still there. And so Barbara Jones, who we've talked about, who's a fantastic editor, one of the best in the business for decades, happened to have just left her job at one of the big 5, and she hadn't started her literary agency yet. So she was doing independent consulting for maybe a 3-month period of time. Mm-hmm. So she read the manuscript and she came back and talked about what was wrong with it. And one of those things was, she said, there's not enough countervailing force. And the way it was written at that time was the way I experienced getting my father's story out of him. So, as you know, it was like this for a really long time. The grown woman talking to the elderly father, and then him flashing back to the war and me flashing back to childhood. And she said, try something else, do the childhood first. And she said 7 scenes, and then do 1 scene of your father's war. And I don't know what the third part is, but try it that way.
Mm.
So that's how it got reshaped. And it's much more than 7 scenes. I think it's 12 chapters
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the beginning. And yeah, but that's
And when
how.
did she come up with the idea of counting every single day of his war?
Oh yeah. So the second part is written in a journal format. So as we were on the call, it was Barbara Jones and Heather and myself. We were on this 1 hour call to go over her ideas and her review. We were all talking about it, and we didn't know what part two should be or what voice it should be in. And I think it was Heather who said, what about he was on the battlefield for 172 days? What about just counting the days off? Because the reader's mind, when you give them, 5 weeks in Rodanthe or 40 days around the world or 6 weeks of solace or whatever, the reader wants to get to the end. If there's a time marker, they want to read to the end of the time. And so I thought, I love that, and it's not every day. It's day 1, day 3, day 7, day 10, day 14. But it kind of marches, and it has this marching feeling too, the marching of time and the marching on the battlefield. So I love the way it is. And I'd never written in my dad's voice before, but it was fun again. So it was fun to write that part again after being super frustrated for a really long time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for anyone who's watching this who doesn't know what we're talking about and they haven't read Little Avalanches, which I highly recommend anyone who wants to write a memoir needs to read it. Um, Becky's childhood is written in the beginning of having a life with this difficult father. And then it goes to his war in his voice, but your voice interpreted through his voice, right? And these 172 days. And then it's the two of them when she's all grown up. And so I'm kind of talking to the reader, but I'm talking to you,
Yeah.
talking to the reader. So yeah, it's these three different books in a way, but they all have this interweaving quality, right? And
Yes.
it's I would have never thought of that. I just would have never thought of putting the father 172 days. I would never have thought of the weave being so loose, right? In many ways,
Right.
but it's not loose because of the people the story is about. It's the continuity of the story. It's allowing time to get up and move and allowing time to get up and move again without this really tight. It's just such an interesting way to do it. And honestly, we've talked about memoir not nonstop, you and I. And where are the interesting memoirs? Where are the artistic kind of renderings that take us outside and push the genre forward, right? In a new and a
Right.
unique way. There aren't that many. And this book does that. And that must be
Thank
relatively
you.
thrilling to you because how many books are very original?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is thrilling. It really is. And there are very few transitions in it, It's this little girl running the story for 130 some pages, and then there's 2 lines, sentences of transition, and then you are back in the 1940s on the battlefield on day 1, and it just starts day 1, and you're just in a soldier's voice, 18-year-old soldier's voice on a battlefield. And then when that ends, there are another, maybe one, I think there's 1 sentence of transition. And then you are 70 years later in my home in Portland, Oregon, or I think I'm at the airport in Portland,
Right.
Oregon, waiting to pick my dad up, my aged father up at the airport. And
Right.
so the readers are smart, and that's the thing, like part of me learning to write and learning the craft is trust the reader. The reader is so smart. That's part of the exposition part too, I think. Like the readers are smart and they can pick up a lot.
They don't need as much of your telling as yeah, but don't you think we do exposition because we want to control the narrative and even how it unfolds before us? Because if we lose track of our story, we'll start to feel things that story inevitably will make us feel that we don't want to feel, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I
So,
also think it's because we don't trust the scene enough or the
yeah.
action enough, you know? I think we don't, and action is so powerful, you know? We all say actions are stronger than words. Show me, you know, show me you love me, or show me you're gonna make dinner every night, or show me, don't tell me.
Right.
And that's the same with writing, right? Like the action is the strong thing.
Well, it's like Maya Angelou says, you'll never forget, you'll never remember what they said, but you'll never forget how they made you feel. And feel the scenes make us feel things,
Yes.
right? It was a
Yes.
real thrill to read your book because, of course, having worked on it for so long, I did know every single scene coming in and out. I just knew touched every word on your book, not as many times as you have, but many times. And I I was there again. I was like, wow, I remember when we worked on that. I remember when we were thinking about that. And a lot of that stuff didn't change.
Yeah.
All that work that we had done together didn't change other than the removal of the exposition in many ways, and this
Yeah.
decision to block it into these 3 sections. And
Yes.
I just I walked away from it, I put it down, I was done reading it, and I was like, "Yeah, I remember every single one of those scenes, I remember every single moment we literally felt like we were sweating blood working on them together in your house or wherever we were meeting, and at the studio, there in Portland." And, but I didn't see it, I didn't see what you had done. And as an artist, I'm so happy for you because artistically, it's very hard to create something new. It's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
hard. It's almost
Yeah.
impossible. And then to get it out in the world. I mean, to do what you've done and do this. That's why I'm talking about you so much because
Mhm.
all day long, I'm talking about have a vision, push that vision forward, trust your vision. And many of us get knocked off our vision. We were talking about Lindsay Lee Johnson's The Most Dangerous
Yeah.
Place on the World, Earth. With Susan Camelot Dial, it was like, yeah, well, we need a third character, or we need this adult teacher to weave in and out of these kids to make this connective tissue. And, that book just doesn't have what it had without her, that teacher that the writer had to kill herself to incorporate in the book, right? And then I think of Tiara Jones's book, American Marriage, and she was forced to put Andre in there between
Mhm.
Celeste and her husband. And it became a totally different book. And as a reader, you're like, yeah, it kind of doesn't work. It's a lovely book. She's a beautiful writer. It's not about that. But the vision was intercepted by people who didn't necessarily get it. They got what they wanted it to be, right? And that's the heartbreak of
Right.
being an artist is often we become intercepted and because we're artists and we're open and we want to get published, we'll be sidelined. And it's heartbreaking after a decade of work, right? To have that happen, which is why I'm so
Yeah.
grateful you didn't go with Harmony and you didn't turn it into a self-help book because in many ways that brought it down as an artistic statement, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
I'm
It
just like,
would
"Oh,
have.
I'm so grateful you didn't do that." If you
Yeah.
were a writer listening to this conversation, what advice would you give about staying with one's vision and doing what you did, even though you fell off for a little while with the 1-year hiatus from it? But what would you tell any writer who is struggling with this very question we're talking about?
So we're talking about a paradox, right? As you were talking, I was thinking there is the paradox of holding your vision, but staying open to new ideas, right? And knowing which idea really sparks with you, right? Because I did go the harmony way and I didn't feel right. And I couldn't really do it well because it didn't feel right. And as soon as Barbara Jones said, divide these stories up, I thought, yes, that's amazing. I can see it, you know? And so it was about sticking with it, keep going, keep going, keep going, refine your craft, get better and better, know your story inside and out, and stay open also, right? And that's what I would say. And get input from people you trust and respect. I mean, as you talked about, you have looked at this book, you have touched every word in it, and And writer's workshop and mentorship is so important because we can't see things just by ourselves sometimes. I can't do that. And I love input. I thrive on it. I think we need the encouragement and we need the perspective, So that's what I would say is keep your vision and stay open and get input and know which input feels right and know which input does not feel
And
right.
that's it right there. That spark that lights you up and fills you with yesness. Anything that
Yes.
makes you go, oh, cringy, cringy, no. Don't
Yes.
go there. You can
Don't go
still
there.
learn from that experience and you can still grow through it because I think you did learn and grow through
Oh,
the harmony experience.
absolutely.
But, you always knew, whoa, this doesn't feel right. So juxtaposing this doesn't feel right against Barbara Jones, which is, yes, that's
Yeah.
it. The
And when we were on the call and we came up with this idea of the journal format, you know how hard it was for me to find my voice, and I wrote about it on the flight school essay, and it was really hard. And part of that, what I think, was me believing my story was worthy against my father's, because he's a war hero with 13 medals and blah blah blah, and I'm just this little kid, and how is my story value, what is my story's value against that, right? And this is kind of the survivor's guilt, right? Oh, I better make something of my life because my father survived. It's kind of that same thing. What can I contribute, and how can I possibly ever contribute as much as he did? But once I found that voice, and once I heard do his story in journal format, I got his voice immediately. It was so easy and so fun to write. I already mentioned that, but I didn't have to struggle with voice all over again. And it's a different voice, it's a different voice than part one.
That was
Yeah.
always your superpower in this piece of writing. Your father always shone on the page. We're all like, we don't love him, but we hear him. He is there. You own that presence in that father, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think going back to just wrap that up, anyone who's listening or watching this and thinking about, oh, I'm just getting started on this journey and I do have this vision. How do I hold steady? It's listening for the spark is very important, and also watching out for weariness, because inevitably, depending on your story, the depths and the where you're going to go, you will become weary, and the weariness breaks you down.
So take breaks from what you're writing, what you're working on, not from writing. Like, I didn't take breaks from working on the craft. I kept working on scenes. I kept writing at my regular writing practice, but I took a break from my long form memoir and I wrote a short story, a short fiction, and that was fun. It was a great break. I came back with more energy for the memoir. So I wish I had done that more. I wish I had taken a few more breaks and I might not have gotten so weary.